Hi everybody and welcome to another piano comparison video here at Merriam Pianos. My name is Stu Harrison, and in this video we're going to be comparing the Roland FP-30 to the Yamaha P125, arguably the two titans of the under 1,000 digital piano category. Thousands of both of these instruments wind up in homes all around the world every single year since these have been out on the market. And today we're finally going to get a chance to review them side by side. So thank you so much for tuning in. If it's the first time to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It'll help you stay up to date with all of our new videos that come out. So let's get started on this right away. So let's get right into the sound comparison between the P125 and the FP-30 here. So there's several points at which or on which we can compare digital pianos, and you hear these specs come up all the time. Things like polyphony or speaker wattage, you know, all sorts of various numbers and comparisons that allow you to take two instruments and understand maybe what they're going to sound like when you finally get them in your home. And so that's exactly what we're going to do with these two great instruments right here. So let's start with the Roland. The Roland has a polyphony of 128 and it has a speaker wattage of 22 in total. So that's 11 watts per side. Now 128 polyphony is certainly an improvement over what you get on the FP10, which is 96. But polyphony on its own can be a little bit deceiving because you're really not entirely sure how many different samples or different tonal elements are actually being played at one time. So 128 on one instrument versus 256 on the other instrument may not always be apples to apples. I realize that's not a super helpful thing for me to say because in some ways you could go away with that comment and say, well, polyphony is almost meaningless because they don't really break down what the spec means. It's still meaningful, but in this particular case, I'm drawing attention to it because the Yamaha on paper has a polyphony of 196. So one would think, wow, the Yamaha is packed with a much more complex set of processing than the Roland. Well, not exactly. When you look at the wave form or the wave structure that the Yamaha is producing, or really kind of the guts of what's producing the piano tone, and this is based on their CFS, not CFX, but CFS3 concert sample versus the Roland, which is their supernatural engine. There seems to be more going on when you're listening to the details and the nuance of what you get off the Roland versus the Yamaha. So that may also explain why they're listing the polyphony at 128, because there's simply more per note happening. But anyway, in terms of the boilerplate or the nameplate spec on this, we're talking 128 versus 196. The wattage between these two is a pretty meaningful difference if you're going to be using the instruments consistently with their own speakers. And there's no, well, I'll just describe the differences to you. The Yamaha has these upward-facing speakers, which makes, or gives you as a player tons of clarity. Faces you directly, you're not hearing it kind of bouncing off the floor or coming back at you from a wall. So that does create a little bit more clarity for you as a player. However, this is equipped with 7 watts per side, so we've got 14 watts in total. And the one thing that's very difficult to mimic or difficult to enhance without just brute power is bass. And that's where the Roland just sort of wins this particular horse race. When we're talking about the warmth and the lower presence, the 22 watts versus the 14 watts, it really isn't much of a comparison when you jack the two of them up and you're listening to those lower notes or the lower presence. The Roland certainly has quite a bit more warmth and quite a bit more presence that you are hearing. One note about how we're actually recording these. So both of these instruments have stereo quarter-inch outputs that are coming to you at home. On the Roland, that's of course coming out of the mini jack, and we've got that split into left and right 1/4 inch going in through an audio interface. On the Yamaha, it's actually got built in 2 1/4 inch left and right outputs as well. So that's how you are hearing it. But you'll also be hearing some of the sound coming in through my lav mic. So we try and do that so you get a blend of both the effect of the onboard speaker as well as some really clear sound coming through the line outs, so that you're not exclusively relying on this tiny little thing right here. So let's just listen to some of that piano tone difference, both the complexity of the waveform as well as maybe some of the warmth that you're hearing, and then of course just your own preference in terms of what type of shape to the sound you like, because I mean, there's nothing more subjective, as I have learned, than the type of piano sound that people really tend to prefer out there. Every time I sit down at an instrument, I think, that is literally the best piano tone I've ever heard. Somebody else who I really musically respect will sit down right behind me and go, that sounds a little bit muddy to me. There you go. So here's the Roland on its concert piano tone, and we'll just play right through the range a little bit. Now let's listen to the Yamaha on its main acoustic piano sound. So there you go. Perhaps you're hearing some differences in there, noticing some that you might like a little bit more. As we've learned from doing these reviews, and like I mentioned just before I played, there is very seldom a right and wrong when it comes to the type of piano sound you prefer, in other words, the shape or the character. But there are things that can be objectively measured and observed, like the quality of the decay and the type of reverb that's being created, or the complexity of the upper harmonics. So those things, hopefully you're able to get a bit of a sense at home watching the video. Moving on from the piano sounds, both of these instruments are nicely equipped with approximately 24 or so principal tones on them. So neither one of these has the full General MIDI 2 sound bank. I think this one has 26 tones. I don't actually remember the exact number on here. It's maybe around 30 or so. But you've got a really nice selection of acoustic piano tones other than the ones we've just heard, some a little bit brighter, some not quite so bright. And of course, back to the other one. And the Roland has 3. Now on the Roland, it is equipped with a Bluetooth radio, and so I've got it hooked up to Piano Partner 2, which it does operate well from. And so just to give you a sense of its piano, I'm going to use the phone to control it. And then finally. So there's a good sense of the two acoustic piano ranges on the P125 and the FP-30. Now let's dive into some electric piano sounds. In some ways, for a keyboard player, the electric piano sounds can be even more revealing in terms of the level of authenticity than the acoustic. They're just as difficult to replicate because you've still got all this nuance around how the e-piano faithfully reproduces things like the sounds of the tines and the mechanics of the key action on things like Rhodes and Wurlitzer. So here is the e-piano sound, number 1, on the Roland. And a second one, kind of a DX sound. And finally, you've got like the whirly. And over on the Yamaha. Kind of almost a bit of a pad in there. So that's a pretty good, I guess, sampling of the type of quality that you're going to get on these two instruments. In a totally separate video, we will do a complete side-by-side sample of all of the or all the tones rather, on both instruments. We're not going to do all of that in this video because this would make it like a 45-minute video. So that's all the back-to-back comparisons we'll do here. Please check out the link, as I said, to go and check out the video where all we're doing is just playing the sounds back and forth. So just to sum up, we've got 14 watts versus 22 watts, 192 polyphony versus 128 polyphony, approximately the same number of sounds, and of course a slightly different character and tone to those principal acoustic piano sounds as you just heard. So we're going to throw those specs up on the screen for you to take a quick look, and then we're going to be moving on to action. The FP-30 has what Roland calls their PHA-4 action with ivory. It's got a pretty big long name, but basically it's the PHA-4 with escapement and ivory. And so what does that mean? Well, that's the action that they put in the FP-10, it's in the FP-30, it's also in the FP-60, it's in the brand new product that's coming out, I think it's called the RD22. You will find this in the F-140. It's basically Roland's staple mid-range action that they've deployed basically across their entire entry-level and kind of up to about the mid-range portable digital piano. It's a very well-known, proven, well-liked action out in the marketplace. And it definitely has a characteristic Roland feel to it. And anybody who's played a lot of Rolands will know what I mean by that. It tends to have it's not a heavy touch, but it's a very mechanically it's a very firm. It sort of feels like it's pretty well constructed. and it's got a bit of a harder bottom to the action than some of the other manufacturers tend to build in there. So you're going to feel when the key hits the bottom of that, the key travel, more than, say, on a Yamaha or on a Kawai, and that's by design. In some ways, that almost causes your finger and the key to bounce off the bottom a little bit, and it actually makes repetitions and long duration playing somewhat less laborious, or at least that's been my experience. So the ivory texture on top is also, you'll also find like a micro texture on the black key. So I'm not sure if the light's picking it up, but you're not going to see any direct reflective glare off any of the keys because that surface is obviously deflecting the direct light. The ivory texture, I think they've done a nice job. It's probably one of the more dramatic textures in the industry, but it's not quite as dramatic as what Casio does. So you can see that there's sort of this subtle grain to the white key, and then the black sort of just has this matte micro texture to it. Makes it really nice to play whether it's really dry or humid. Somehow those textures manage to create more grip no matter which end of the spectrum you're on. That's kind of nice. It's a small thing, and if there was a single complaint I had, it's not even a complaint, let's call it an observation. The white keys on the PHA-4 action are not quite as rounded as sometimes is what you get on other instruments. Now, if you are already familiar with how a real grand piano with ivory keys feel, this is actually very consistent with what you get on most white keys on a piano like that. So it's not like their decision to design it this way has come out of thin air. It is based on tradition and history to build the key not with a hard edge, but certainly it's a fairly squared off edge. Whereas the Yamaha is very rounded and something that you'll find on more modern acoustic grands that has that plastic topping. So there's that. It has escapement. And that means, of course, that about 2/3 of the way down, you're going to feel, maybe it's closer to 1/3. Well, anyway, you feel it on the way down. And that's essentially simulating what you get on acoustic grand, where the jack kind of finally tips off the knuckle on the shank of the action, or of the hammer. It seems like the kind of thing that you wouldn't actually care that much about, but if you're playing classical music, or you're playing even just a lot of ballads, like maybe you're a gig musician and you're doing a lot of accompanying for vocalists, for example, I actually notice the escapement. That's actually something that does give me a bit of an extra sense of control and just familiarity, because I'm used to it on an acoustic. Anyway, so that's the PHA-4. I really like the action. For people who are looking at Roland as a whole brand and considering a wide variety of their products, I'll note that the PHA-4 feels quite a bit different than the PHA-50 that's on instruments like the FP-90, RD-2000, DP-603. It feels a little less Roland-like, and it kind of just is its own thing. I happen to like it, but I would say the PHA-50 is more polarizing in terms of people's opinions of it than the PHA-4, which generally speaking seems to have a really wide majority of support out in the musical community. Let's pop over to the P125. Now this has GHS action, and this is an action that's been out a while, and it's probably one of the least advanced parts of the P125. I was going to say the least impressive, but I mean, again, we're dealing with some very sort of personal opinions when we're talking about pianos. The action feels really solid. I mean, there's not a lot of mechanical you're not feeling a lot of parts moving when you're pressing the keys. And part of that is that it's a slightly, mechanically, it's a more simple action than what you're used to on the PHA-4. There's no escapement on the GHS. And depending on the volume I'm playing it and the style of music I'm playing it, it also feels slightly heavier. Like there's a little bit of a mushiness to the action. But you feel really sure-footed under, while you're playing that. It's something that seems to be very forgiving, and you do feel a certain accuracy when you're playing the Yamaha as well. So it's not a hands-down winner between the two, but they do feel quite different. And generally speaking, I think the GHS is probably due for a bit of an update, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Yamaha coming out with some type of an update to that action in subsequent P-series models in the very, very near future. So that's it for action. We're going to move on to our third and final section of the video, where we're just going to quickly review other features like the auto accompaniment. We're going to throw those specs on the screen for you. When we get into other features beyond just tone production and the action, there are some things that these two have in common, and then there are some differences that could be totally critical to your decision, so we're going to make sure that we mention them. Let's start on the Yamaha. So the Yamaha has a couple of very cool things about it that I like. One of them is that it's got the built-in 1/4-inch stereo outputs. Makes it very, very easy for you to be plugging into amps and PAs and things like that without eating up a headphone jack. The Roland, I guess you could argue, is still giving you a lot of flexibility, and you've got 2 ports on the front which double as both headphone jacks as well as outputs. And you can toggle, actually this is true on both of them, you can toggle whether your internal speaker is on or off, so you're not forced into having the speaker go off if you're using the headphone jack, which is nice. I think that's just going to become standard practice with manufacturers moving forward in this price range and up. That's going to just stop happening. It's kind of weird that it's been such a forced option in most cases for as many years as it has been. The P125 as well as the Roland also both come with matching stands if you wish it, as well as triple pedal units. So we've got them just in slab format today, but I know both manufacturers offer them. Kind of makes it look a little bit more like a permanent home piano versus a portable gigging piano or rehearsal piano. They also both come with pretty basic sustain pedals, which is not great. I would actually highly recommend upgrading them both, regardless of which one you get. I know the Roland DP10 is a extremely durable sustain pedal that you can get that will give this, you'll get years out of that pedal, and it definitely makes it a lot more usable and than just those plastic little, damper pedals that skate all over the floor. You have to tape them down even just to be able to use it. It's very annoying. Not sure why any manufacturer does that. Well, cost. That's definitely a really important reason why they would do that. Saves you some money, but if you can afford to spend the $50, $75 to upgrade the pedal, definitely worth it. One of the things that the Yamaha is missing that the Roland has is the Bluetooth connection, and you've seen me using my phone to control the Roland earlier in the video. You can also use the phone through the Bluetooth to get really, really high fidelity piano recording sounds as well. The Yamaha does not have the Bluetooth. It does have a USB connection, so you can certainly hook this up to a computer, most DAW software, and still trigger off of it. And they also have Yamaha software that you can pair to this to sort of have a similar type of connection, but it's not wireless. I think wireless is becoming a bit of a standard in the industry with instruments. You're seeing it in a number of different settings. Kawai's doing it, Roland's doing it. So I'm sure at some point Yamaha will have most of its line on the wireless Bluetooth. At this point, they do not. You do need a physical connection. The Yamaha has a really well done onboard auto accompaniment or auto rhythm function. I'm just going to quickly demonstrate it right here. It's easy to access. It says rhythm right on there. And then as soon as I start to play, it's going to pick up the general chord that I'm doing and sort of follow me around. And it's quite engaging, actually. And there's quite a few rhythms on here to choose from. So it's easy to do. You start it up, and then right where the metronome numbers start, you can just kind of go through and pick different ones. Sorry, I'll be here all day. So on and so forth. And then it's also got a basic recorder built into it. Over on the Roland side, the FP-30, you need to use the Piano Partner app to get those rhythms. But of course, if you do, they're there and just as fun as what you get on the Yamaha. And it's got some endings that are built in there. And so if the plan was to use this in some sort of performance, you could kind of get to know what those endings were so you could play along with them. And so there are 21 rhythms on there. I don't know exactly what the number of rhythms on the Yamaha, but I would imagine it is somewhat similar. And then beyond that, we've got kind of the normal complement of all of your basics like transpose, metronome. You can split, you can layer. Both of those have the ability to do that quite nicely. So just to sum up this whole comparison between these two instruments, because I know this is some of the most popular product on the market for pianos, and we really wanted to do this properly, do this right, and give everyone out there our honest shake on how these stand up to one another. So we've got speakers comparison. If you're going to be using it without amps and without headphones most of the time, Roland is winning in that category. It's certainly got a fuller sound and 22 watts of power versus the 14 watts of power with the Yamaha, although you do get a little bit more clarity because of the placement of those upper speakers. In terms of the tone engine, we've got the Supernatural engine here with 128 polyphony. We've got 192 polyphony over here, and that's using the CFS 3 probably, sample in terms of its source for the piano tone. Then we've got the GHS action, no texture on the keys, no escapement, versus the PHA-4 over here where we've got the texture, we've got the escapement, we've got the triple sensor. They both are coming with stands, both coming with triple pedals, or of course available like you're seeing them right here with the slab format. Bluetooth over here, no Bluetooth over there, and rhythms available from both of them. This one on board, this one you have to use the app in order to access that. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've enjoyed the review. And of course, like we said at the beginning, if it's your first time by, please subscribe. We would love to keep you in the loop and up to date on every new video that we produce. And also, please leave a comment and let us know what you thought of the comparison. And if we missed anything, we always want to know. We're trying to get better, as always, here at Merriam Piano. So thanks so much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed. We'll see you back next time. My name is Stu Harrison.
The sun is rising, feel the warmth